Hey everyone, welcome to another video. In this video we're going to have a look at The Myth of Sisyphus, written by Albert Camus. The Myth of Sisyphus is a really interesting and unique book. It's also kind of scary in some ways, and at the same time it can also be quite difficult to understand. So I hope that this video can help with understanding what the book is all about. In case you've already read the book, then please let me know what you thought about the book in the comments. And please also let me know if you agree with my analysis of this book. So we will begin this video by talking about absurdism, which is a very interesting philosophy. And Albert Camus, and then especially with The Myth of Sisyphus, was one of the most important contributors to this philosophy. We will then discuss how one becomes aware of the absurd according to Camus, also why time and nature are absurd, what kind of efforts we take in our lives to deny the absurd, and how we can actually live with the absurd. What is absurdism? Well, basically it's a rather scary philosophy. Its proponents basically argue that life does not have any inherent meaning, and that any attempt at finding meaning is basically doomed to fail in the end. So this of course does not sound very optimistic, but I think in a sense the Myth of Sisyphus and absurdism in general can also be in a sense a bit optimistic, in fact. Why this is the case I will explain later on. So according to absurdist philosophers, life does not have any inherent meaning and life is in fact absurd. And according to Camus, it symbolizes that odd state of soul in which the void becomes eloquent, in which the chain of daily gestures is broken, in which the heart vainly seeks the link that will connect it again, then it is as if it were the first sign of absurdity. So yeah, this may sound a bit vague at first. What I basically think it means is that if you're just going along with your life, then suddenly at a certain point in time, as this quote also mentions, you will ask why you're doing what you're doing, why you're going to work, why you're going to school, why you're having lunch and everything. Suddenly you will ask why. And as soon as one asks this question, then one basically becomes aware of the absurd and will notice that one's life is, well, quite absurd in many ways. And as soon as one kind of becomes aware of this, then one will continue to notice that a lot more aspects about our daily life and life in general are really absurd. For example, Camus, he argues that the way in which we treat the concept time is also really absurd as well. According to Camus, we treat time kind of casually, but in fact we should be horrified by the concept of time. Camus thinks it's absurd that we always long for tomorrow. We want to grow up, we want our kids to grow up, we want to finish high school, we want to retire. In fact, according to Camus, this is all really absurd. He wrote, "He belongs to time, and by the horror that seizes him, he recognizes his worst enemy. Tomorrow, he was longing for tomorrow, whereas everything in him ought to reject it." Camus really thought that it's strange and it's absurd that we treat such a concept so casually, something that will eventually kill us. Why is it that we are actually longing for it? And as soon as one becomes slightly conscious of the absurd, more and more things will start to feel strange. So Camus wrote, "A step lower and strangeness creeps in, perceiving that the world is dense, sensing to what degree a stone is foreign and irreducible to us, with what intensity nature or landscape can negate us. At the heart of all beauty lies something inhuman." We kind of take our place in nature, but at the same time we are really far removed from nature as well, which is of course also really absurd if you think about it. According to Camus, if we become aware of these absurd facts about our lives, then we might suddenly find ourselves in a rather uncomfortable position. So according to Camus, it's possible that then our world might no longer make any sense. So through tales and habits we have masked the true nature of the world, and our old world will be shattered, and we must face the world as it really is, an absurd place. And Camus also argued that any efforts that we make to describe the world in another way as absurd are in fact really useless. All the efforts that we make to give meaning are useless as well. And according to Camus, this is the case because we simply do not know anything for certain. He wrote, "This heart within me I can feel, and I judge that it exists. This world I can touch, and I likewise judge that it exists. There ends all my knowledge, and the rest is construction." Camus even proposes that it's impossible for anyone to clearly grasp the self. For if I try to seize the self of which I feel sure, if I try to define and to summarize it, it's nothing but water slipping through my fingers. Between the certainty I have of my existence and the consent I try to give to that assurance, the gap will never be filled. Forever I shall be a stranger to myself. Basically, according to Camus, all that we know is actually that we know nothing except that life is absurd. I think you will agree that so far this does not sound very promising. However, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I still think there's some reason for optimism, even with such a theory as absurdism. So Camus wrote, "The absurd is not in man, nor in the world, but in their presence together. For the moment it's the only bond uniting them. A single certainty is enough for the seeker. He simply has to derive all the consequences from it." Basically, we don't really know anything for certain, except we know that life is absurd, and therefore we can use this fact, this knowledge, to kind of guide us through our life. So according to Camus, as long as we have something that we can hold on to, in this case absurdism, then we can actually still have something to guide us. So therefore, according to Camus, we can draw a certain form of strength from this acceptance of the absurd. We can decide to live basically without any hope for meaning or any happy ever after fantasy, and thereby simply accept the fate and our life as it is, as an absurd thing. Who therefore wrote, "The absurd man thus catches sight of a burning and frigid, transparent and limited universe, in which nothing is possible, but everything is given, and beyond which all is collapse and nothingness. He can then decide to accept such a universe and draw from it his strength, his refusal to hope, and the unyielding evidence of a life without consolation." Friedrich Nietzsche, in his book Human, All Too Human, wrote something similar. He said that now man has this book of happiness perpetually in the house and congratulates himself upon the treasure inside of it. It is at his service. He grasps it whenever he is so disposed, for he knows not that the box which Pandora brought was a box of evils. Hence he looks upon the one evil still remaining as the greatest source of happiness. It is hope. If one would accept the absurd and therefore also live without any hope, one would kind of rid himself also of one of the greatest sources of evil. Being aware of one's life, one's revolt, one's freedom, and to the maximum is living and to the maximum. According to Camus, if one recognizes these facts of life, then one can truly live. I think you will agree that it's quite a scary philosophy. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. So what we've seen so far is that absurdism is a philosophical school that argues that life does not have any inherent meaning, and that any efforts to find meaning are basically futile. According to Camus, as soon as we become aware of this fact, then we will notice that almost everything in our lives is absurd, like time and our position in nature. And according to the absurdist philosophers, nothing in life is certain except that life is absurd. However, this is not all bad at all, because in fact this one certainty we can use to draw all of our strength from and find meaning in this life. So what we should basically do, according to Camus, is accept the absurd, accept life for what it is, relinquish all hope, and thereby live to the maximum. Yeah, it's really up to us to decide whether we think that this book is absurd or whether we agree with Camus that the world is in fact absurd. I definitely believe that the Myth of Sisyphus puts forward a really interesting theory, a theory which does make a bit more sense after investigating it a bit further. However, what I think is really interesting is that we can, even from accepting the world as meaningless and absurd, still find a form of meaning in this meaninglessness. So in this sense, although it looks rather pessimistic at first, I'll still think that it can be considered quite an optimistic book in the end. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this video will inspire you to read this book as well. And if you've already read the book, I hope it might make you understand the book and the absurdist philosophy a bit better. So I hope to see you in the next video as well.